It was late October, the kind of night where the air feels thick with secrets, and the wind howls with the kind of malice that rattles your bones. We were clearing out the old Stanton house, a crumbling relic perched on the edge of town like some forgotten guardian of things best left alone. The house had been abandoned for years, sagging and creaking under the weight of too many winters, its broken windows staring out like empty eye sockets. That's where we found it, the box. We'd made it to the attic, the last place to comb through before we could declare the house officially cleared. Dust hung in the air like a suffocating cloud, making it hard to breathe, let alone think. The attic was a graveyard of forgotten things. Old furniture draped in cobwebs, yellowing newspapers, and trunks filled with things that no one had thought to miss. And then, tucked away in the darkest corner, we saw it. A wooden box, no bigger than a shoebox, but far heavier than anything that size had any right to be. It was covered in strange carvings, almost like they'd been scratched in by hand, rough and jagged, spiraling around the lid in a way that made my head hurt to look at for too long. It wasn't just the weight that bothered me, though. It was the feeling. That crawling sensation at the back of your neck. The one that tells you something's watching, even when you're alone. "You gonna open it?" one of us asked, their voice cutting through the silence like a knife. I didn't want to. I really didn't. But there's a kind of curiosity that gnaws at you, digs its claws in deep, and won't let go until you give in. So I did. The moment I lifted the lid, it was like the world itself held its breath. There was nothing inside, just an empty, yawning blackness that seemed to stretch deeper than the box could possibly go. But there was something else too, a coldness that seeped into my skin the moment I touched the wood like an icy hand gripping my wrist. I yanked my hand back, slamming the lid shut. I don't know who said it first, maybe it was me, but someone whispered the word, shadow box. It wasn't just a name. It was a story, a legend, the kind that gets passed down in hushed tones, never fully believed but never quite dismissed either. They said it could trap the soul of whoever opened it, that it would steal your shadow and let it live its own life, while you slowly faded away into nothing. I didn't believe it. Not at first. But then it started. It was subtle at first, just small things. I'd see a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye, something shifting when no one else was around. The others laughed it off, saying it was just the old house playing tricks on us. But I knew better. There was something wrong with the shadows, something wrong with my shadow. It wasn't always where it was supposed to be. It didn't always move the way it should. I'd turn my head and it would lag behind, a split second too slow, as if it was trying to catch up to me. And then it started doing things on its own. Little things at first, like flicking across the room when I was standing still. But it escalated fast. One night, I woke up to find it standing at the foot of my bed. I swear to God it was there, looming over me, darker than the darkness itself. My heart slammed in my chest, my breath caught in my throat. It didn't move for what felt like hours, just watching, its head cocked at an angle that wasn't quite human. I blinked, and it was gone. The others thought I was losing it, said the stress of the house was getting to me, but they weren't there. They didn't see the way the shadows moved when no one was looking, the way they twisted and crawled across the floor, their edges too sharp, too alive. And then, it wasn't just my shadow. One by one, it started happening to them too. We tried to laugh it off at first, but you can only laugh for so long before the fear sets in. We started sleeping with the lights on, staying together in groups, as if being together would somehow protect us. It didn't. It was during one of those nights, huddled in the living room, the dim light casting long shadows across the walls, when it happened. The shadows shifted, all of them, and then they stepped out. It was like watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion. One by one, our shadows detached themselves, slipping from the floor, from the walls, and standing in front of us like twisted reflections. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. We knew what they wanted. They wanted us, our bodies, our lives. They wanted to take our place. And then they attacked. It was chaos. Screams filled the air as we fought to get away, but the shadows were faster, stronger. One of them grabbed my arm, its fingers cold as ice, and I felt something shift inside me, like part of me was being torn away. I don't know how I managed to break free. I don't know how any of us did. But somehow we made it out of the house, stumbling into the street, the cold October air biting at our skin. I glanced back just for a second, and that's when I saw it. My shadow, standing in the doorway of the house, watching, waiting, and then it smiled. It was my smile, but it wasn't me. We've tried everything to get rid of them, to seal the box, to destroy it, but nothing works. The shadows are still out there, lurking, waiting for their chance to take us. Every time I look in the mirror, I see it. The shadow that isn't mine, waiting just beneath the surface, ready to step into the light. I don't know how much longer I can hold on, but I do know one thing, the box wasn't empty. Not really. It was waiting for us. And now it's hungry. The days after we left the house were a blur. No matter where we went, the feeling stayed, like we were never really alone. I kept my curtains drawn tight, lights on day and night. It didn't matter. The shadows were there, always just out of sight, waiting, watching, and then came the dreams. Every night I found myself back in the Stanton house, standing in that dusty attic, staring down at the shadow box. Only in the dreams it wasn't closed. The lid was wide open, and something was crawling out, something blacker than any shadow I'd ever seen, spilling over the edges like smoke, only thicker, heavier. It would slide across the floor, slow at first, but then it would lunge. Every time I woke up just before it reached me, gasping for breath, drenched in cold sweat. But the real terror came when I opened my eyes. Because it wasn't just in my dreams anymore. I'd see it, the shadow, hovering just at the edge of my vision, slipping back into the corners of my room the second I looked at it. But it was there. And it was getting closer. The others were falling apart too. We barely spoke, but when we did, it was in frantic whispers, voices cracking from lack of sleep, from fear that felt like it had wrapped itself around our throats. We stopped going outside unless we had to. The shadows were worse out there, more erratic, harder to avoid. There was no safe place, not anymore. Then came the night I couldn't shake. One of us, let's call him the tall one, hadn't answered his phone in days. That wasn't like him. We all had our own ways of coping, but radio silence? That wasn't normal. A few of us drove over to his place, a small rundown apartment at the edge of town. The lights were on inside, casting a weak glow through the dirty windows. But something was off. The shadows, his shadow, wasn't right. We knocked. No answer. Then we banged, calling out his name. Still nothing. One of us reached for the doorknob, and I swear to God, the second we touched it, something moved inside. I can't explain it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way the air felt suddenly colder, but we didn't want to open that door. We had to, though. The door creaked open into an apartment that reeked of something foul. Like rot, but worse, like decay and darkness mixed into something you could almost taste. The place was trashed, furniture knocked over, papers strewn everywhere. And then in the corner, we saw him. The tall one, or what was left of him. He was slumped in a chair, his body hunched as if something had drained the life out of him. His skin was pale, waxy, like he'd been dead for days. But his eyes, they were wide open, staring blankly ahead. His mouth twisted in a frozen scream. And there, standing behind him, was his shadow. It wasn't attached to him anymore, not really. It stood over him, stretched too tall, too thin, its head tilting unnaturally as it loomed over his lifeless body. And then it moved, slow and deliberate, turning toward us. It saw us. We backed away, stumbling out of the apartment, slamming the door shut behind us. But it didn't matter. I felt it. I knew without a doubt that it could follow us anywhere it wanted, and now it knew we were next. That's when it hit us. None of this was random. The box, the shadows, they were feeding off us. Every time we gave in to the fear, to the nightmares, to the paranoia, it got stronger. The tall one had been the weakest, the most scared, and now he was gone. His shadow had taken him. The rest of us were just waiting for our turn. We had to do something. We couldn't just sit there waiting to be picked off one by one. Someone suggested going back to the house, to the attic. Maybe if we returned the box, we could stop this. Maybe if we locked it away, sealed it forever, we could save ourselves. It was a long shot, but it was the only plan we had. The night we went back, it was colder than usual, the kind of cold that settles deep in your bones, no matter how many layers you wear. The Stanton house loomed ahead of us, dark and empty, like it was waiting for us to return. The front door creaked open with a single push, and as we stepped inside, that suffocating silence hit us again. Everything was exactly how we'd left it. Dust-coated floors, broken windows, and the attic door half open, beckoning us to come back up. I didn't want to go. None of us did. But there was no turning back now. The attic was worse than before. The air felt heavier, thicker, like something was pressing down on us from all sides. The box was still there, sitting in the same dark corner, waiting. But now, the carvings on the lid seemed to pulse, almost like they were alive, like they were watching us. One of us, let's call him the brave one, stepped forward. He reached out, hands shaking, ready to grab the box, ready to end this nightmare. But as soon as his fingers touched the wood, the attic door slammed shut behind us with a deafening bang. And then the shadows came. They poured out of the walls, out of the corners, slithering across the floor like living darkness. They crawled up the walls, too fast, too eager, their forms twisting and contorting into monstrous shapes. The brave one screamed, but it was too late. The shadows were on him, wrapping around his limbs, pulling him into their cold, suffocating embrace. And then they tore him apart. We ran, stumbling over boxes, clawing at the attic door, but it wouldn't open. I could hear the brave one's screams echoing in the dark, could see his shadow twisted and stretched across the floor, moving on its own, even as his body lay limp and lifeless. Finally, we broke through. We tumbled down the stairs, gasping for breath, hearts pounding in our chests. Behind us, the attic door swung open again, but we didn't dare look back. The box was still up there, and now it was hungry for more. But here's the thing. When I glanced down at the floor, at the flickering streetlight casting our shadows as we ran, I noticed something. Mine wasn't there. We didn't talk much after that night. What was there to say? We had lost 2 of us now, and the rest of us were hanging on by a thread, barely sleeping, barely functioning. But it wasn't the grief that haunted me, it was the silence. The silence that came after the screams, the silence that seemed to stretch out like an endless void. It was the silence that told me something worse was coming. I couldn't stop thinking about the box, about how it wanted us. It didn't just take, it fed. Fed on fear, on our shadows, on whatever was left of us after we opened it. And now, 2 were gone. The brave one, torn to pieces by those slithering things in the attic, and the tall one, his shadow already living its own life. But it was me that haunted me the most, because I had looked down that night, and I had seen nothing. No shadow, no flicker of black cast against the pavement, nothing. I knew what that meant. I tried to avoid looking in mirrors after that. It didn't matter. Every reflective surface, windows, puddles, the black screens of my phone and TV when they were turned off, they all showed me the same thing. No shadow, just a hollow version of myself standing there looking normal, looking alive. But I knew the shadow wasn't mine anymore. I was next. It started small, just like it had with the others. I'd catch glimpses of it, out of the corner of my eye, lurking in the dark corners of my room, a flicker of movement behind me when I turned away. My own shadow was watching me now. It had detached completely, and yet it hadn't left me. It lingered. I don't know why. Maybe it enjoyed the game. Maybe it was toying with me, letting me think I still had time before it took me completely. But that time was running out. I tried to tell the others, but they wouldn't listen. No one wanted to talk about it anymore. We were all too far gone, too broken by what we had seen and what we knew was waiting for us. I wasn't even sure if they were still them. Maybe their shadows had already taken over, and I was the last one left. The fear gnawed at me every waking moment. I started staying awake as long as I could, gulping down coffee, doing anything to stay out of that house in my dreams. But even then, I could feel it, my shadow lurking somewhere just beyond the edge of my vision, growing stronger with every moment I spent fighting it. And then it happened. It was a cold, gray evening, the kind where the light fades too fast and the shadows stretch too long. I was sitting on my bed, staring blankly at the wall when I saw it. Not a flicker this time. Not a blur out of the corner of my eye. No, this time it was standing there right in front of me, my shadow. It was upright, fully detached from me now, but it wasn't shaped quite like I remembered. It had stretched, twisted, becoming something more sinister, more alive. Its edges rippled, not like the soft blur of a real shadow, but sharp and jagged, like broken glass. And it stood, taller than me, its head cocked at that same unnatural angle I had seen in the others before they were taken. It didn't move. It didn't need to, because that's when I noticed something else. My arms, they weren't moving either. I tried to lift them, but they stayed limp at my sides. I tried to stand, but my legs were heavy, weighed down as if they had been drained of all energy. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't waiting anymore. It was inside me. I could feel it now, moving through me like cold sludge, filling up the spaces I didn't even know I had, freezing me from the inside out. I was still breathing, still conscious, but my body wasn't mine anymore. It was just a shell, a husk. And my shadow, the thing I used to think was just a trick of the light, was now in control. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. The thing that looked like me, the thing that was me now, turned and walked toward the door. I was still inside, somewhere deep, buried under layers of darkness and cold, trapped in a body that no longer belonged to me. It stepped outside, into the cold evening air, and I could feel it, my consciousness, my thoughts, slipping further and further away. I was fading, dissolving, becoming part of the shadow itself. Soon, I would be gone, swallowed whole by the very thing I had once thought was just an absence of light. And that's when I heard the voice. It wasn't mine. It wasn't the others. It was something deeper, something older, whispering from within the dark corners of my mind. The box wasn't meant for you. It's never been just a box. It's a door. A door to what? I couldn't understand. My thoughts were too jumbled, too weak now. But the voice continued, creeping through the edges of my consciousness, as if it was trying to make me understand before it was too late. You opened it, you let them out, and now they're taking you back. And then it clicked. The shadows. They weren't just detaching. They weren't just taking over. They were pulling us into whatever place they had come from, into whatever world the box had opened. I wasn't being taken over. I was being replaced. Replaced by something that looked like me, something that could move like me but wasn't me. And I, the real me, was being pulled into the darkness. I could feel it now, the last strands of my consciousness unraveling, the pull of the shadow world growing stronger. And as my body, my shadow, continued to walk through the streets, blending into the gathering darkness, I realized that I was already gone. The box wasn't a trap. It was a doorway, and I had opened it. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me completely was the reflection in a shop window as my body passed by. And in that reflection, my shadow turned toward me and smiled. It was the same smile I had seen that first night in the attic. Only now I knew it wasn't mine. I don't know how long I was lost in the dark. It felt like an eternity, but time didn't move the way it used to. There was no up or down, no left or right, just blackness stretching out in every direction, suffocating and endless. I wasn't sure if I still had a body, if I was still even me, or just a shadow now, floating in some void beyond the world I used to know. But there was something else, too. A sound, faint at first, like a whisper carried on a faraway breeze. It grew louder, more insistent, cutting through the silence of the dark. And then I realized it wasn't just a sound. It was a voice. Not the same voice that had whispered to me before. This one was different, familiar even, and it was calling my name. I strained to listen, trying to latch onto it, but the darkness was thick, pulling me down, deeper into the void. The voice grew more distant, fainter. I was slipping away, disappearing completely. But then, just when I thought I was lost for good, something changed. The darkness around me began to move, swirling like thick smoke being drawn into a vortex. And in the distance, I saw it, a faint glimmer of light, small but growing stronger with each passing second. The light pulsed, bright and warm, cutting through the blackness, and with it came the voice again, stronger now, clearer. I could make out the words. "We can still save you." I didn't know who it was. I didn't know how they had found me in this place, but I clung to that light with everything I had left. I focused on it, pulling myself toward it, feeling the grip of the darkness loosening just a little with each step I took. The light was getting brighter now, seeping through the cracks in the dark, until finally it burst through like a flood. I was blinded for a moment, overwhelmed by the sudden brightness, but when my vision cleared, I realized I was no longer alone. I was standing in the attic. The real attic of the Stanton house, with the dusty floorboards and the cobwebs clinging to the rafters. And in front of me, there they were, the friends I had thought I lost. The tall one, the brave one, and the others. They were all there, gathered in a circle, their faces pale but alive, their eyes locked on me with a kind of desperate hope. The box was in the center of the room, its lid half open, pulsing with a faint, eerie glow. But this time the carvings that spiraled across the wood weren't jagged, weren't twisted. They were calm, almost peaceful, as if something had shifted inside. The brave one, the real brave one, not the twisted thing that had taken him, stepped forward, his voice shaky but determined. "We found a way," he said. "We can still stop this. We just have to close the box. For good." I stared at him, my mind racing to catch up. How was this possible? How were they all here, standing in front of me, when I had seen them, had felt them, get taken by the shadows? The tall one spoke next, his voice steadier. "The shadows aren't as strong as they want us to believe. They fed on our fear, yes, but we're still here. We fought our way back, and now so can you." I wanted to believe them, but the pull of the darkness was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, trying to drag me back. I could feel my shadow, hovering just out of reach, waiting to reclaim me. But the others weren't backing down. The brave one stepped closer, reaching out his hand. "You're not alone," he said. "We can do this, together." I hesitated for only a moment before I took his hand. The instant our fingers touched, I felt it. A surge of warmth, of life, rushing through me, pushing the darkness back, forcing it to retreat. The others joined hands, forming a circle around the box, and I could feel the air change, growing lighter, brighter. The shadows swirled around us, desperate, clawing at the edges of the light, but they couldn't break through. Not this time. With a deep breath, I stepped forward and placed my hand on the lid of the box. For a moment, I felt a jolt of fear, a flicker of doubt. But then I looked at the others, at the brave one, at the tall one, at all of us who had fought our way back from the dark, and I knew what had to be done. I slammed the lid shut. The attic filled with a blinding light, so bright I had to close my eyes. The shadows screeched, a terrible sound that echoed through the room, but as the lid sealed shut, the sound died away. And then there was silence. When I opened my eyes again, the attic was still. The box lay motionless on the floor, its carvings faded, its glow gone. The others were still there, their faces filled with a kind of quiet relief, their shadows, our shadows, perfectly normal, stretching across the floor in the soft light of the setting sun filtering through the cracked window. We had done it. The shadows were gone. The box was sealed, and we were alive. As we made our way out of the house, the last rays of sunlight casting long golden shadows across the street, I couldn't help but smile. We had survived. And in the end, that was all that mattered. There would be no more shadows lurking in the corners, no more fear haunting our every step. The box was closed for good, and whatever darkness it had unleashed was locked away, never to return. And as we walked away from the Stanton house, I glanced down at my feet, half expecting to see nothing there. But there it was. My shadow, just as it should be, walking beside me, whole and complete. We had won,